You are listening to the US of NA by Nation Beer, a series of stories about the people and places from every corner of the country who are helping fuel the NA beer movement. If you like this episode, please add us to your library in Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you prefer to listen. For more great NA stories, including our many beer reviews, visit nationbeer.com.
Would you love to get free stuff in exchange for helping non-alcoholic brands get cans in hands? Or are you an NA brand yourself interested in expanding your reach? Join the waitlist to find out about our new Grassroots Ambassador program launching later this year. Just go to nation.beer to find out more. Welcome to the US of NA, or in today's case, maybe the US of LA or MA, since we'll be talking about low or mid-strength beer for this episode. I'm John Eggleton, Chief Hoptimist for Nation Beer. Obviously, low-alcohol beer and non-alcoholic beer are not one and the same, but for those of you who've been following us for a while, we've been thinking about lower alcohol beers ever since our fourth episode with Todd DiMatteo, founder of the Little Beers Festival in Georgia, which is a low-gravity beer celebration focused on lagers, pilsners, and other sessionable beers. For anyone who's thought about the gap between NA and the higher gravity stuff, as of this summer, there's now a brewery going after exactly that, called Dad Strength Brewing. Based in Washington, D.C., they are trying to invent a new category, and as you'll hear from one of their co-founders, Ryan Kutcher, their story is kind of similar to those who have pioneered NA beer, with maybe a few dad jokes sprinkled in, which is totally their brand. They've also done their research, looking at trends in Europe, where lower alcohol beers have existed for a while, and they've very much been paying attention to the NA movement in the 2 years they spent building, which you'll hear in our interview. We hope you enjoy hearing their story. All right. So today I'm joined by Ryan Kutcher, co-founder of Dad Strength Brewing. They're a new Washington, D.C. based brewery that's aiming to define a newer category they call mid-strength beers, featuring full craft beer flavor, but at an ABV that falls in between an NA and higher gravity craft beer like an IPA, which just so happens to be their first style offering. Their West Coast IPA comes in at a 2.9% ABV, which for now is only available in the D.C. area, the district. We'll get into all the details in a minute, but first, Ryan, thanks for joining us on the show, man.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. My first beer podcast.
All right. So for our listeners, let me just make a couple of comments before we get into the questions. So why do we want to do this episode? So this is a show that is primarily about non-alcoholic beer, right? Which is a category we love and support, and which is obviously enjoying phenomenal growth. So I think from the human perspective, I think what Ryan and his business partner are doing is all in the same vein as the moderation movement that NA is a huge part of, and changing how people may drink, which is a good thing. We also know that north of 80% of NA drinkers also drink alcohol, which would point to a huge business opportunity, potentially, for mid-strength beer. It's not an option for some, and we very much respect that. But we wanted to have this conversation as we see it as another way moderation is making its way into our collective drinking habits, and that's definitely a good thing. So with that in mind, Ryan, my first question to you, we love your origin story with your co-founder, which includes the fact, I believe you each found out the other was mixing NA beers with craft beer to lower the ABV. So tell us about that and how Dad Strength Brewing came to be.
Yeah, well, even going back, I guess a little bit before that experience, I didn't drink for 4 years. I didn't drink it. I was completely dry and started to drink a little bit of wine here and there, but that was like sort of towards the end of my 30s and into my early 40s. And, you know, kind of upon returning to drinking a little bit, the Knicks made the playoffs for the first time in like a long time. And I thought, wouldn't it be really nice to be able to watch this entire game and enjoy, you know, a couple beers along the way? But I cannot actually drink like a real beer. So I was mixing Heineken and Heineken NA. And I was like, ooh, Heineken 2.5 or whatever, you know. And it kind of worked, but I was getting made fun of. And I texted my friend, who is now my co-founder. I've known him for over 20 years. His name is Craig. And I said, look what I'm doing. You know, the guy at the bar keeps calling me the mixer. And he was like, this is the weirdest thing in the world. And he texted back. He was mixing Athletic Run Wild with Sierra Nevada. So he was kind of doing a craft beer MIDI, and I was doing a mass import MIDI, but we were both trying to solve the same problem, which is we can't drink like we used to, but we still do. So how do you address that? And we've had a lot of bad ideas that we bounced around throughout the years. We're both entrepreneurs, and we couldn't kind of shake this one. And we were like, why doesn't this exist? We started to do a little bit of research. You mentioned at the top of the call, like we've seen up to 95% of people that drink non-alcoholic beer are drinking regular beer. Some have called it like in your swapping, right? You're trying to extend that experience without getting into like the danger zone. Because A, being too drunk is not a good look. And B, at least the insight from our standpoint is when you've got a teething 1-year-old, I'm 45, I have a 1-year-old son, a teething 1-year-old at 5 a.m. and you're hungover is also a unique form of hell. So, what's the solution? And it's some form of sort of moderation, and whether, I've heard it called zebra striping, which I don't love. I call it malternating because I think
like
it's really cute.
Too. Yeah.
It's so cute. But, we started to kind of do, before we got too deep down the rabbit hole, we started to look, and, I have friends in the UK, and I texted them about this idea, and they were like, oh, yeah, mate, mid-strength beer for successful drinking. And I was like, isn't that the coolest way to think about it? And then we looked in Australia, and there was an article, it was like Australia's top 25 mid-strength beers. We're like, 25? We don't even have one. So there's something about those cultures that has identified an opportunity. And for us, then the question was, well, I don't want a 2.5% Bud Light. No offense to Bud Light. If you've ever been to Utah or, certain states in the Midwest, 3.2 beer was probably pretty common to a lot of people, whether you were buying it at a gas station or on Sunday or whatever. But for us, like that bug is the feature. It's just that we're not referencing Bud and Miller. We're referencing craft beer because we grew up drinking craft beer, really delicious, tasty, nuanced, dynamic, interesting, hoppy beers. And so through a friendship, we were connected with Atlas Brewworks here in Washington, D.C. They're a elite brewery. They're World Beer Cup gold medal winning brewery. And we said, hey guys, is this possible? Could we brew like our goal at Dad Strength, we're completely dedicated exclusively to beers between about 2.5 and 2.9%. So we call ourselves America's first dedicated mid-strength brewery. And we say, guys, could you do this? Could you land an IPA that hits and slaps like a real IPA? And they said no. So I was like, oh, okay.
So much for that.
Yeah, we kind of asked around and the variety, we probably interviewed 10 different, talented brewers, and they called us back and they said, let's try it. We have some ideas. And from that day on, it was about a year. And I think we did 4 or 5 pilot batches, and it was a process of elimination. We start with the aroma, and then you land the appearance or the color, and then you land the mouthfeel, and then you land the flavor. So through that process, we went through about 4 or 5 batches, and we landed with something that we think is legitimately really, really a terrific IPA. Our goal was this beer has to be 3 things. It has to be super drinkable at like a 2.9%.
Yep.
It has to be absolutely delicious, because if it's not, who cares? And then the third was we really want it to be a low calorie profile. So it's 94 calories, which makes it less calories than a Michelob Ultra. And that little kind of trifecta was the sweet spot. And it took us a while to get there. But I think people that have tried the beer, I think hopefully would agree. It's pretty good. It's our favorite beer. So
I would hope so.
That's the whole story. Yeah.
The middle it could have bad connotations, like the middle child, the middle seat on an airplane.
Yeah.
The political middle, nobody wants to talk to them. But, it makes so much sense in beer that why has no one tried to do this at least in this country yet?
Yeah, and nearly impossible to keep up with Gen A and Gen Z slang, but apparently mid is a bad thing. It's like, you're so mid. I'm obviously too old to even know what the hell that means, but for us, it was, yeah. So we really don't call it mid-strength because, even my brother who's got strong opinions was like, it's not really mid-strength, because if you think about beers that go 10, 11, 12, mid would put you at 5 or 6. So it's lower, but like it's really more about occasion, right? Like when we're doing tastings or sharing this with people, they'll kind of stop you and go like, oh, you know what this is? This is lawn mowing beer, or like this is beach beer, and you're like, great, exactly. This for me it was make it to the fourth quarter beer. So it's these different occasions for people where that light bulb goes on. But it is sort of a new thing because we would walk down the grocery store aisle and you go like, here's your Voodoo Ranger at 10,000% alcohol. And then it goes down 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. And then there's nothing.
Yeah.
And then there's zero. And you're like, there seems like there's this whole, just like this space here. It seems like there should be something. And now there is. So we'll see.
You're right. I mean, there is kind of that gap. And I don't think, whatever it ends up being called really doesn't matter. It is more about the situation. And I think, as the younger generations, and by the way, as the parent of two teenagers, I can attest to mid. I understand that age slang a little bit, but yeah, I mean, I just think that people are looking at the whole category differently, and definitely younger people are just not thinking of drinking in the same way. I mean, it's more about like, what do I feel like? What do I want to feel like today? And what can I buy to meet that need right now? And I don't think they're really focused on like, is it mid strength? Is it low? Is it whatever? It's what they're looking for at that particular time. So,
and even is it beer? Like, is it beer? I mean, of course, our approach is beer. We brewed it by beer brewers, but you're really just looking for some beverage that fits the mood, that fits the occasion or the experience that you're looking for too. And I was also inspired by hop water, which is absolutely delicious, and it's like that's zero alcohol, of course, but it's almost, if you've had it, have you ever had hop water? I don't know who's had it, who hasn't. I don't know how popular it is, but we tried it at a brewery and I was like, my God, that's good. It's just like so dynamic, and you can capture a lot of that same idea of like, well, I don't even know what the hell it is. I just know that I want it when I'm doing X, or like,
yes.
I want it when I'm mowing the lawn. I want it when I'm after a run. I want it if I'm going to be, at an event and I got to kind of hang all night or whatever it is. And it's like, yeah, that it fits that space.
So let's talk about the beer a little bit. So obviously the first one is a West Coast IPA, and you guys now already have launched an apricot IPA right behind it. Is that right?
Yeah. So we actually, as of, I don't know when this will go live, but yesterday we tried, I think it was version 3 of our apricot. And so that will be available in 1 week's time. That makes it August 23rd or something like that. We'll be kegged. And we didn't do kegs for IPA, but we will do kegs for apricot. And again, it's just sort of another, I mean, it's kind of a weird second choice maybe to some, but we're trying to recreate our favorite beers, and apricot just works really well. Super fruity and summery and all that stuff. We're not really subscribing to, like, you're not going to probably see, really obscure beers from us. We're living in that IPA range for now because those tend to be a little higher alcohol in their traditional form. So we're creating some alternatives, but we're working on a Pilsner as well, which, as I mentioned, the process to get there, it's a little bit longer than you think to get to that low ABV that's really hits like a real beer. So we're hoping to get a Pilsner out sort of in the next 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, we were going to ask if your plans were to be like a traditional brewery and kind of have all the different styles. I mean, are you have the Pilsner coming out, it sounds like, next, so probably maybe more of the core, but not too exotic, it sounds like.
Yeah, we're cherry picking, a little bit, and like I said, with flavors, I mean, I think we're not bound by, kind of strict brewery credentials, or it's more about like what can we make that's delicious that we want.
So the relationship with Atlas Brewworks that you talked about,
Yeah.
you were introduced to those guys. How does that relationship work? So how hands-on are you and Craig in terms of the beer itself and the recipes, and how does all that stuff go down?
We're hands-on to them in probably just the absolute most annoying way that we could be, V over there, Daniel, who is Villaruby, who is their head brewer, is really terrific. My background is not in beer making. Craig's background is in the restaurant space. Mine is in marketing and advertising. So we basically had this thought, we kind of gave the brief to Daniel, and then we try the beer and we sort of say, like, what do you think? How do we feel? Is it where we want it to be? How could we get it to taste like this? We take the feedback. It's very collaborative, but he's the beer specialist. So I'm joking, but I think the relationship's really good, and we trust those guys implicitly. They're, as I said, they're world-class brewers, and so far so good.
So I know the brand is very dad focused, and it makes total sense that it would be marketed at people like us. And I say us because I'm in that demographic too. But I'm sure there's other people who are buying this, and I'm just curious what kind of feedback you guys have had on that so far.
Well, I mean, I think to some extent you were touching on marketing philosophy in 2024, and our intention was very much to find an audience. But it wasn't even that. I mean, we were the audience, and we developed a solution for a problem that we had that was very real. And the thinking was like, this problem exists for us. It probably exists for others. You may know this, but almost 80% of craft beer drinkers are men. They're aged between roughly 30-ish and 60-ish, sweet spot. Guilty again, we sort of solved a problem that's true of us and kind of leaned in, so to speak. And the story is very real, which is like when you've got a teething 1-year-old, like I mentioned, or, you don't really have the luxury of having overconsumed, and the ramifications of that being hungover is just terrible. And with the calorie profile, we like to say dad strength does not cause dad bod. But now when we do tastings, there's always someone that's like, oh, how come it's not mom strength? And it's like, they're like, you should make white wine. It's twice as strong. And that's pretty funny. But the name, of course, is a choice, but it's for anyone that can find the appeal of this kind of classic West Coast style IPA that's super drinkable. But we certainly intentionally solved the problem for a specific audience.
So you mentioned, in the craft beer aisle at the store, the ranks get pretty thin after about 5%, down to the NA side. Where are the retailers putting you so far? And, how are they trying to position it in the stores?
We're in local craft. Okay. If it were up to us, we would say, hey, position us here. I think one of the challenges that we inherit as the first mover is that we have to help define this new category. There's, like I said, people aren't quite even sure what necessarily to do with it. So they'll put us in local craft. So they'll put us in DC. That means we're with DC Brau, we're with Atlas, we're with those guys. Our intention is hopefully to take this and develop this category and become a national brand, which would slot us next to the Athletic, just because it should be like low, no, and then high over there, so that it's kind of a spectrum. But that's where we are in most retailers for now.
And I know you were telling me earlier that you guys have been working on this idea for a couple of years. You've been in market now for only a couple of months. Has anybody reached out to you? I'm just curious. I would imagine that you might be hearing from some breweries who are like, hey, I love what you guys are doing. Could we do a collab together? I mean, is that something that's on your radar at all at this point?
We haven't been approached by any breweries doing a collab. Again, I mentioned my brother. He was like, you guys need to do a collab with this brewery. I think at present, we're just kind of focused on did we get it right and get it into market and get that feedback. I will say the feedback has been pretty terrific. And I think you can't really know that until you're in market, you're doing tastings, and you're finding your audience. So we're open to it for sure. I think we're sort of just getting our feet under us enough to say there's you kind of head down and then you're like, oh, there's actually all these possibilities that we could explore. But job number one was product market fit, develop an amazing, delicious product, get it to market, get the feedback, see if there's a click there. And then from there, okay, now what does our core consumer look like? Where are they? How do we get it to them? And how do we continue this kind of flywheel of feedback and delivery and all that stuff? But I mean, with the story of Dad's Drink, certainly like collaborations with Kraken, the pickleball folks here in town, DC Pickleball.
Yeah.
You know, you can kind of Zolo, like all of these different activity partners, right, that we can start to explore. We have a shirt. I'm not wearing it, obviously, but it says Après Pickle. And it's like après ski, but for pickleball. Pickleball has adopted us pretty quickly. So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we sort of see on the horizon that we'd love to do.
Well, the opportunities are certainly endless. And last question I have for you. I know you guys have a launch party for the Apricot IPA, I believe on the 24th. And so after that, what's next up for you guys? I know you're a new business, and like you said, you're just trying to get your sea legs under you at this point. But what are your goals through the end of this year and going into 2025?
Well, certainly we have our numbers. We have our, that's like sales goals that we want to hit. We're, dedicated to helping our partners that took a chance with us to make sure that we're doing everything we can to help kind of keep it moving on shelf and get into as many hands as we can here in DC. We have our innovation pipeline, and there's some other exciting stuff. I talked about Pilsner. We want to do a grapefruit IPA. So we're sort of all systems go in all facets. But now that we're in market, it's very much about like making sure that we're doing everything we can to get people to try it and get people to kind of buy it again and hopefully make it a part of their routine and sort of get this new category idea to land. So that's kind of the goal. And thanks to the people of the non-alcoholic world for sort of bracketing, the experience and proving that there is this spectrum and that there's, really something for everyone.
Well, awesome, Ryan. I really appreciate you taking the time. We're excited about what you guys are doing there, and can't wait to see.
Have you tried it? Did we get it to you?
I have not, so I'm all ears. So if you,
my God, we've got to get you some. Yeah. So we'll make it happen. Let's connect. We just launched D2C today, so there's another answer. If you are in the district, you can order direct to consumer directly at dadstrengthbrewing.com. And if you reach out to us on Instagram, we'll make it happen. So we'll get you some.
All right. Awesome. And so, dadstrengthbrewing.com. If anybody else out there in the DC area, what are some of the retailers you guys are in so far?
Yeah, we're at Rodman's. We're at Calvert Woodley. We're at 45 now. So if you're on premise, you go to Metro Bar, you go to Hylon. Let's see, where else? We're pretty much in every neighborhood somewhere fun. Odd Provisions. Let's see where else. I mean, there's a handful there. But you can also find everywhere right on dadstrengthbrewing.com. We have a place that'll help you find your closest retailer.
Well, we look forward to seeing where you guys go. And it's dadstrengthbrewing.com. Thanks for chatting with us, Ryan.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
I want to thank Ryan Kuchar for doing the show with us. Fun brand and really interesting category they're going after. As you may know, some of the macro players are dipping into that same low ABV range, although with light beers and not craft styles. For example, I know Miller makes a Miller Extra Light that's 2.8 ABV and 64 calories. On the craft side, Kevin Barnes from a couple of episodes ago is also involved in a project called Andiamo Brew out of Aurora, Colorado, which is targeting craft styles between about 2.8% and 4%. So definitely a category to keep an eye on. All right, we've got another interview with a New England brewer coming up on our next show, with 2 more on the calendar shortly thereafter. So make sure you're subscribed, either the audio version you're listening to now, or we now have a YouTube channel with video. So find us there at Nation Beer, no spaces. In either case, stay safe out there and cheers.